Look at verse 24 on the top right hand. But in those days following that distress, the sun will be darkened. What's going to happen tomorrow at 3 o'clock? The sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. Well, there's another passage in the Gospels that talks about the moon turning to blood before the great and glorious coming of the Lord, and the name of the Lord will be praised. And so here we have, if you kind of pool those two together, and it's just kind of rolling around in my head. So I got on a federal government website and traced solar eclipses backward until 100 AD, 100 BC. They take it all the way back, and they have the dates, and they also have a map. If you want to get on that, just Google it. It'll come up. They have a map that shows you where you could be at about 60, 65 AD. About the time that Mark was written, and you could see where the solar eclipse was going. And it goes right through Israel. It's amazing. Like you can pull up a map now. You've seen the maps on the news. If you're in this area where we are now, you're going to have the best view of the solar eclipse. But there's also one back then, 60, 65 AD. And so you can trace these things backward. And astronomers, I'll get that right, have already done that for us. And it's a fascinating little study. And I also looked up, when was the last blood moon? It seemed like we've had a lot of blood moons in the last 15 years. It's just repeated. And so the last one was in November of 2022. So just a couple years ago. We've got the blood moons already taking place, and we got the solar eclipse that's going to happen tomorrow, albeit there may be some cloud cover or not. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out for you. So we're starting something to think about. Where are we in the history of time? What's God doing, and how are we to interpret that? The moon, will not give its light, and the sun will not give its light. What's going to happen in those days? Was he seeing something in the future? You remember when Saddam Hussein blew up his own oil wells, and there was black smoke, and you could see nothing from there. I mean, it was just pitch black. Is something like modern warfare going to be involved? Is this something that's completely of cosmic origins? We got that new telescope, the James Webb telescope out in space now to kind of look at all this. So anyway, you can take a look at it, think about it. We are in Daniel chapter 1 and on page 625 of your Red Pew Bible. And as we prepare page 625, Daniel chapter 1, just a simple little sermon. And I'm reaching from a PowerPoint switcher, but I forgot to load the PowerPoint this morning, so we don't have a PowerPoint. It was a good one, too. It was a good one. I did some AI-generated pictures, so I don't have to worry about copyright imaging, for Daniel and the Babylonian Empire and so forth. So maybe we'll be able to see it next week. So just before we get into this, I think I've mentioned to you before about the cowboy who went in to get some new life insurance. And the life insurance agent asked him, he said, well, have you had any accidents lately? And the old cowboy said, no. He said, I've been kicked by a horse. I've been charged by a raging bull. And I've been snake bit. He said, that one set me back a little bit. And the agent looked at him and said, wouldn't you call those accidents? And the old cowboy said, no, I'm pretty sure they did it on purpose. Why do bad things happen to good people? The theological term for that is called theodicy. Theodicy, theodicy. There's a whole study of it, reasons why. There are conservative biblical views of it. There are liberal biblical views of it. There are non-biblical views of it who try to superimpose their opinions onto the Bible. We have to trust the Lord when bad things happen to good people. And we have a whole litany of this taking place in the Bible, story after story after story. Abraham and Sarah, you wonder why did they never have kids, for so many years. 90 years old, thinking about having a baby, even back then. Pretty well unheard of at that point. We think of Old Testament Joseph. His brothers hated his, we would say today, hated his guts in our American sense of hate. And the outline of his life all starts with a P. He went from pet, his father's pet. He's the guy with the coat of many colors. From the pet to the pit, his brothers threw him in the pit, and then they sold him into slavery, and he wound up in prison, pet to prison, and then he became the Prince of Egypt and saved his whole family, and they all moved down to Egypt, you remember. But he went through a pretty rough time, when your brothers hate your guts and sell you into slavery and waved you as you being led off into slavery through the desert dunes. That's pretty bad experience. And then we have the Old Testament guy who was named Joshua. You remember? He's one of the only two guys that survived the 40-year or wandering in the wilderness. But here's a guy who had all the faith. He and Caleb. Let's charge forward. Let's do it. God can do it. He's going to do it in us through it. But it was 40 years later, 40 years, he had to watch everybody in that generation die. How many funerals? It was like over 1 million people wandering around in the desert. And how many of those people? And so here's a guy who he did it all right. He did everything right. He's even honored in the Bible. In the Old Testament, back then he's honored, and he's still honored. And yet, 40 years waiting for a dream to come true. Now, we look back at that and say, well, it's 40 years. But what if you had to wait 40 years to see your dream come true? Why? Why do Abraham and Sarah have to wait? Why does, Joseph get sold into slavery? Why does Joshua, And then there's Job, the pinnacle of suffering, of the innocent suffering. Here's Job. He did it all right. He would even go to church, and after church he'd offer a sacrifice to God on behalf of his kids, just in case they sinned. He doesn't know if they did or not. He said, it doesn't matter. I'm going to do a sacrifice for God just in case my kids have been naughty. And then wham, It's the only place in the Bible where we see the background of what's happening in heaven behind the scenes. We've got the first 2 chapters of Job, and we have this intercourse here, this discussion between Satan and God. And Satan says, Job, you give me Job, and, eye for eye, skin for skin, and take his health and all that. And Job, why did Job have to go through everything he went? That's the Odyssey. Why do bad things happen to good people? It's not supposed to be that way. If you read Deuteronomy chapter 26, 27, along in there, we've got the blessings and the curses. And if you serve God, he's going to bless you. He's going to bless your crops. He's going to give you health. He's going to bless your kids. And if you do wrong, then, God's going to be displeased with you. It's not going to work out that way. And I think so often we bring that Old Testament blessing and curses into the New Testament church right now, here today, right now, that nothing bad's ever going to happen but you know what? Sometimes it does. I think less bad things happen when we serve the Lord because we stay away from a lot of stuff we ought not to be getting into anyway. But to say it's never going to happen, if anything bad happens to you, you're living a sinful life. No, that's what they were saying about Job. No. It could be that, everything's going right, but it just, for whatever reason, here we are. And so let's take a look at chapter 1. Simple little message here today. Probably going to get out of church a little early because simple little sermon here today. Daniel chapter 1, page 625. in your red pew Bible. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. This is when Israel loses their country, right? I mean, Israel, the northern half of the kingdom's already been conquered. Judah's the bottom, the southern half, and now they've just been besieged. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. What would that be? Golden goblets and silver plates and those types of things. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. The king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude of every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. So you see what's happening here. And we just conquered these people. And so we're going to take the children of the aristocracy and we're going to turn them into servants for the new kingdom. And so these young men are teenagers, probably 16, 17, 18, right along in there, very young. Daniel's young. His 3 buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, they would be in the youth group, right? That's who we're talking about here. And so these young men are taken away from their family. They're moved to a different country. They have to learn a new language. They're thrown into service of training for 3 years. And then for the rest of their life, they're going to be a servant in the house of the king or the king's court or something to do with that. And so they've gone from being one of the aristocracy to one of the official servants. And so, and plus they've lost their family, and they're going to lose their name. It's all coming here. Verse 5. The king assigned them the daily amount of food and wine from the king's table, and they were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among them were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel he gave the name Belshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. All those names have to do with the pagan gods of Babylonia. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission to not defile himself in this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you. Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat or water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and wine they were to drink, and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them in, that's 3 years, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the 1st year of King Cyrus. The glory of this book is we see the sovereignty of God all through it. God's in charge. Nobody else in charge. It's not the king who's in charge. It's not the king's court who's in charge. It's God who's sovereign over everything. He's superintending over all the events that are taking place here. And the first thing that we see here is there's just two little points here for our message today. These four guys, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were young and they were determined. I think there's something to be said for a young person who is determined to serve the Lord, no matter what. So we got these young guys who've been taken away from their family. They lost their name. They lost their culture. They lost everything. And they're forced into the king's service. And although they're there, they have determined not to defile themselves. And the key verse for this whole thing, starts the whole book. Look at verse 8. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself. That's it. It goes on to talk about food and wine and so forth like that. But here was a young man who determined he was going to serve the Lord, didn't matter what everybody else did. And God gave him favor, and he went to this man, asked him for, let's try this. And of course, he said, well, okay, we'll give it a try for 10 days. And you know the story of it all. But it all started with a young teenage boy, a teenager, a kid from the youth group. He's in high school. He's in grade 11. And he's asking, I am going to serve the Lord regardless of what everybody else says or does or thinks. That's what I'm going to do. And we need to see that today. This young man's lost everything. How many people have I seen in my lifetime, and you too? I got my feelings hurt, and so I'm never going to church again. God didn't do what I wanted God to do, and so I'm not going to serve the Lord. And here we got a young man, a very young man who is determined to serve the Lord, even though everything's been stripped away from him. He's got nothing. What's he going to do? Move up the ladder of success? He's going to be a slave his whole life. And yet it's determined. He's resolved in his heart, I'm going to serve the Lord, period. You know what? That's the attitude we need today in the church in America. That's the attitude we need today everywhere. That's what we need as grown-ups. We need to see that. We need to see more young people who are doing that. And I'm so fortunate in all my years of ministry, I've never been in a church that oppressed the youth. I've heard about it in other places, but I've always seen the opposite. We get a young man, a young woman who's trying to serve the Lord. It's like, what can we do to help? Let's push them along the way. We're going to do everything we can. We're going to bend over backward. We're going to help. We're going to give. We're going to do, because we got young people who are trying to serve the Lord. Best possible thing that could ever happen. Young people who are trying to serve the Lord. They were young. They were very young, and they were determined. Now, we're going to take this book on to the end, and Daniel, at the end of the book, is an old man. Still in the service of the king. He's been in the service of several kings. The kings are coming and the kings are going, and Daniel is staying faithful to the Lord all the way through. And he's going to have some trials. You know what's going to happen. It's coming. And so we have Daniel here. He was young. Did you hear about a young man named Neil Anderson? Neil Anderson's from Iowa, and he loved to run track in high school, and he did well in the state track meets and so forth. And he wound up going to college in Colorado Mines State College, and he ran track there. And their mascot really was called the Ore Diggers, and he was studying to be a metallurgist. And he was doing quite well, and he was posting some of the best records in the history of the school, and the whole track was really inspired by this guy who could run so well. He really liked the steeplechase race. The steeplechase is when they run around the track and they have to jump a hurdle, and right after the hurdle is a pool of water, like equestrian. They actually do that, it's in track. And that's the one he liked, and he was pretty good at it. and he was placing in state meets. Now, this is Division II school. It's not Division 1A. It's not Ohio State, but it's Division II. But, you know, this young man's running. He's competing. He's one of the best in the state. And in 2012, he was ready to run in the state competition at the end of the school year when he got a call from a doctor. He had been suffering with headaches. And the doctor called and said, unfortunately, you have a brain tumor. It's about the size of the end of your little finger, and it's in a little bag about the size of a golf ball full of fluid, and we need to operate on you, and it's in the back right hemisphere of your brain. They had some medical title for it. And he called his coach about 2 or 3 days before the track meet, and he said, and he was crying. And he said, Coach, I can't run. He said, I got to have brain surgery. And so they operated on him. They removed the tumor, and everything was successful. His recovery was difficult. He came through that better than anybody would think, but he wanted to get back to running, and he had a series of setbacks physically. His knees didn't want to work. You know, after you've been laid up for a while and you try to get back into it, and it was just over and over, and constant setbacks for 18 months. Graduated college, he got into graduate school to get his master's degree in metallurgy, and he got back into running again after a while. And so this is his final year now for his master's degree, and he's want to run in the final race, and he placed 22nd in the state, and they only take the top 20 to the state competition. He thought, well, I gave it my best. But for some unknown reason, 2 guys who were above him in the rankings decided that they didn't want to attend the competition, and so he was bumped in as the 20th one, and he went to the state competition. His last race in his college competition, studying for his master's degree, and he's determined to run in the steeplechase the best that he could. And run he did. He ran his best personal time ever. His teammate ran his best personal time ever. The guy who won the race set the new record, and his teammate came in 2nd place, and Neil Anderson came in 6th place, the best time he'd ever run in all of his college career. And we've got a video of him being interviewed right after that race.
We're here with Colorado School of Mines senior All-Americans Tyler Curtis and Neil Anderson from
Neil's
today's
on the
2,000-meter steeplechase. Guys, talk about this race strategy coming into today, and how do you think you executed it?
All right. We knew that some of the top guys were going to go out pretty quick, including Tyler here, so my plan was to pretty much stay relaxed, stay kind of in the back, and just start trying to push the last couple laps, and it ended up working out for me. I was able to start picking people off and throwing a good last 800, and it got me a pretty good finish, so I'm pretty happy.
Tyler, talk about your race, take us through it. You know, your 2nd time runner-up here, great way to end the career.
Yeah, well, going into the race, I knew Tabor, the guy who won, he was thinking of going for the meet record, which he did get, amazing runner. But even though I knew he was doing that, and it was so much faster than my PR, I wanted no regrets from this race and just decided I'm going to try and win. I mean, he went out so hard. I was honestly never really around him, but I just kept chasing him and just hoping and just keep pushing, and 6-second PR, 2nd place again, can't complain.
6-second school record, you mean?
Yes.
Neil, how does it feel to be an All-American once again after the last 18 months and what you've had to go through?
It feels great. I kind of went in the race with the same mentality as Tyler here. I knew it was my last shot, and regardless of what I'd been through, that's not really taken into account when they give out trophies. So I just wanted to give it everything I had and see what happens.
How does it feel, guys? You've been here for several seasons together. How does it feel to stand atop the podium together one last time?
It's an amazing feeling.
Yeah, just absolutely amazing. I finished the race already and just so thrilled, and turned around to see Neil finishing ahead of so many people. I just so excited, just elated. I don't know.
Awesome. Awesome job, guys. Thank you. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were young and determined. They're going to serve the Lord. Didn't matter. This young man was determined he's going to run. And it didn't matter what happened. It took him 18 months to get back to the place he could run. And finally was able to do that. You know, we can learn a lesson from a young person. There is a verse in the New Testament that says, do not let anybody look down on you because you are young, but set an example for them. And so that's what we're looking for today in our young people. Don't let anybody look down on you just because you're young. You set the example. You serve the Lord. That's what Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did. And point number 2, God honored their devotion. I mean, we got a couple young guys here, 4 of them who decided we're going to serve the Lord, and God honored them for it, and He blessed them for it. And it says right here at the close, the very last, second to last verse, in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the rest. 10 times better. Well, you know, was that because they only ate vegetables, or was that because of their devotion to the Lord? I think it was because of their devotion to the Lord. God honored their devotion to Him. I think we can say that God will always honor our devotion to Him, whatever that may entail. And sometimes, like Daniel, we go through difficult times. Sometimes, like Abraham and Sarah, we have to wait a little while. Sometimes, like Joseph, we have to go through some pretty hard situations, but when we get to the other end, we're able to help other people out. Sometimes, like Joshua, although we've done everything right, it seems that we're the one that gets put on the back burner while everybody else gets to do their thing. Why do we have to go through this? But we know in the end that God honors him for it, and he enters the promised land and conquers it. It's a tremendous thing that God enables this young man back then to do. And then, of course, we know the story of Job, who went through so much. At the end of his life, God honors him and blesses him, and he's better off in the end than he ever was in the beginning, but he still lost 10 kids. Think about that. So, theodicy, it's a very real thing to think about. Why do bad things happen to good people? I don't know that we'll ever get it figured out. God is able to use these things for his honor and his glory. He's able to work through us to comfort other people with the comfort that we ourselves have received when we've gone through something like this. But God took a young man, a very young man. What was he, 15, 16, 17, somewhere along in there. A young man who was devoted and determined. I'm going to serve the Lord. I'm going to serve the Lord. And it doesn't matter everything else that's happened to me. Doesn't matter what's going to happen to me. I'm going to serve the Lord. That's the way it is. And you know what? We need to see more of that today. Not only in our young people. We need to see that more today in our grown-ups. You know, some people are pretty easy to throw in the towel and say, God didn't do what I want him to do. And, you know, if God's not going to do it my way, if I've got to go through this, well, forget him. Well, you know what? That attitude's out there. But I don't think it's a good one. And here we have an example of a teenager who said, doesn't matter. And I'm going to serve the Lord. And then through the rest of the book, king after king after king, his whole life, we wind up at the end of the book, he's an old man, still serving the Lord. His advice is still being sought out. His friends, they wind up running the whole country, are certainly a part of it. Just tremendous, just tremendous. And so how can we adopt for ourselves that determination to serve the Lord come what may? That's what we're looking for. I think that's what God is looking for in his children. And so Pastor Mike's going to come lead us in closing song. Stand with me if you would, please. If there's something you'd like to pray about, the altars are always open. If you'd like to come and pray and say, God, give me that determination. God, help me. Maybe you know somebody who's going through a difficult time. Bad things happen. They do happen. I don't know why they happen. But I know God does, and I know God is in charge, and God will work it all out. All things work together for good to those who serve the Lord. Didn't say all things are good, but that God will work all things good. And we know Daniel's life is going to turn out all right, but he doesn't know that at this time. Doesn't need to know that at this time. But he's got the mindset, I'm going to serve the Lord. And that's what we need today. And so I encourage you and challenge you, serve the Lord. Serve the Lord.